Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
The latest edition of the Inside the Birds podcast dropped this morning with Jeff Mosher and Adam Kaplan, and they're talking with Greg Cosell about the New York Giants, which is very convenient because the Inside the Birds guys talking about the state of the NFC East, and so is Andrew DiCecco. Mike Gill and Andrew were doing week-by-week previews of all the divisions, and we've saved the best for last. The NFC East is no longer the NFC least. There's a lot of what-ifs in the division, though, so we're going to get to all four teams with Andrew DiCecco, InsideTheBirds.com, writer at DiCecco NFL on Twitter. And he joins me right now on 97.3 ESPN. Andrew, how you doing today?
Doing all right, man. How are you?
Doing pretty good. So before we get to the specific teams, what is your perspective on the NFC East? Because to me, I think the entire division, in some way or another, every team got better at something. What is your perspective on the division as a whole?
Well, I mean, on paper, I think it's going to be a lot more competitive than it has been in recent years. But again, the game's played on the field, obviously. So a lot of things, health, of course, being, the most paramount and instrumental to any team's success is going to be, this summer is going to be very telltale in that regard. And also, how are these different components, how are they going to come together and gel to form a cohesive unit early on into the season? Sometimes a lot of these different pieces don't really gel or form that chemistry until later into the season. And sometimes by that point, Josh, the sort of train has gotten derailed and off the track, so to speak. So there's a lot of different caveats that you have to look at. But, on paper, you have to like what every team has done as far as making, leveling the playing field.
So let's go team by team. I want to start with what Greg Cosell, Mosher, and Kaplan talked about this morning with the Giants. And to me, I agree with them. I think one of the most fascinating storylines for this season is new coaching staff. Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka coming into this offense with Daniel Jones, with all those wide receiver weapons. What are the things that you are wanting to look out for with this new coaching staff, with this very new offense with the Giants?
Well, obviously with Mike Kafka there being experience with that Kansas City offense, of course, and he was a passing game guy there. So you want to see a little bit more innovation in terms of what the Giants are able to do from a passing game standpoint. They obviously have the weapons in place. You have Kadarius Toney, who, there's a lot of questions, surrounding his maturity level and where he's at in terms of development. But his skill set is undeniable, and he's an explosive player. So you want to see if they're able to kind of use him as a Tyreek Hill light type of talent, get him the ball in space, and get him on the move. And then Kenny Golladay has a lot to prove. So I'm looking to see if Kafka and the coaching staff can get a lot out of him. Also, let's not forget Brian Daboll, right? Brian Daboll, he got the most out of his quarterback there in Buffalo and Josh Allen. And I think that I'm interested to see what he's able to do with Daniel Jones, who I still think has some potential there. I think that there is a lot of moving parts around there, a lot of different things that sort of maybe hindered his development to some regard. And some of it, of course, was on him as well. But I'm interested to see what he's able to do with a head coach in place that has a proven track record of developing and working through some of the deficiencies of the quarterback. And then, Don Martindale, right? I mean, you look what he did in Baltimore, very aggressive coordinator. And I think you're going to see a less passive and a more aggressive defense. He's going to be on the attack a lot more. And so we'll see what happens. But you have to – I've been very impressed with the Giants in terms of what they've done in building the coaching staff, because that, to me, has always been one of their biggest drawback, right? I think there's always been coaching in a constant flux there. And I think now they have some stability, and with a mixture of a young coach and some experienced guys that have a proven track record of development.
When you look at Daboll's history, Josh Allen in Buffalo, Jalen Hurts at Alabama, he worked with the tight ends, the New England Patriots, guys like Gronk, and then Brady at quarterback. Daboll has a very extensive history around the NFL. So I want to ask you, what can Daboll take from his background into the Giants situation that, frankly, a lot of people have a ton of questions about?
Well, I think he's going to provide structure first and foremost. I think you just mentioned that he's had success at different levels. He's had success working with different positions. So he has different approaches that work with each player, and I think that he's going to be able to find a way to get through to each individual player and find a way that's going to be most conducive to their environment and what's going to help them ultimately become the best version of themselves. So, I mean, that said, I think that there's a lot of things to work on with Daniel Jones. Consistency, just a little late on his throws and things of that nature, not the little quick working through progressions. I don't think he sees the whole field particularly well on occasion. Then there's some games where you make some throws and you're kind of like, wow, where's this been the whole time? So I think he's going to make Daniel Jones a more consistent passer, and this is really a make or break year for him. So he's got the right coach in place to get the best out of him, I think.
What are your thoughts on the Giants' offensive line? I love the draft pick of Evan Neal. I think he's going to be a stud in the NFL. But over the last few years, the Giants' offensive line has kind of been a dumpster fire.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair assessment, but they have invested resources. You look at Andrew Thomas in the first round a couple of seasons ago. You mentioned Evan Neal, so they have their bookend tackles there. Shane Lemieux is I believe he was a mid-round pick in 2020. I like some of the things that he's done. He of course, I believe, went to LSU, if I'm remembering correctly. So they have it's a far cry from being world beaters and one of the premier offensive lines in football. But are they better than they were last season? Absolutely. Are they better than you're starting to see continuous improvement in that area? And I think you're going to see sort of a change of the guard there with this coaching staff in place. I think there's going to be more of a precedent placed on offensive linemen and winning in the trenches. And not only that, but identifying the right guys to do so, because that's always been the problem, particularly on the defensive side for the Giants. So I do like some of the pieces that they have there. They're still a long ways away, though.
You mentioned Don Wink Martindale earlier. I want to get back to that. His defense is very different than Patrick Graham. So what are your thoughts on this Giants team? They have some interesting pieces on the defensive side of the ball, but you're talking about a completely different way of calling a defense from Patrick Graham to Martindale.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a lot more of an attack-based scheme, in my opinion. I mean, you have a guy like Thibodeau that is going to be interested to see how they're going to use him. I would envision that they're going to turn him loose and let him get after the quarterback. You have Tay Crowder, who's there as their linebacker. I believe they drafted what's his name? Micah McFadden, I think, from Indiana, if I'm remembering that correctly. So he's there as well. He was a mid-round pick. Then of course you have Azeez Ojulari, who was a second-round pick in 2021. So they have some guys there, and I think you're going to see a much more aggressive and less passive defense there with Wink Martindale in place. Now, the question that I have is, you have some pieces in the secondary. Is that enough to complement what they have from on the defensive front? Now, I think that I like Julian Love. I think Xavier McKinney is a solid player, but then you look at the cornerback spot. Torrey Jackson's been very up and down, and I think that he really is the type of player that needs a strong corner playing opposite him, because I don't know that he's really ready or equipped to take the mantle of being a top corner on any defensive backfield. And Darnay Holmes is a player that I really like as their nickel corner from UCLA. Very quick twitch athlete, good short area quickness, fluid, stays in phase with receivers exceptionally well. So, they have a couple of decent components there to work with, but I still think that there's some rough patches there on defense that they're going to have to figure out a way to smooth out.
Also, former Eagle Michael Jacquet is now with the Giants, so he adds to their.
Well, he has to make the team first.
That is true. Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Follow Andrew on Twitter at @DiCecco NFL, and check out his work over at InsideTheBirds.com. Andrew, let's go down the road to Washington no longer the Washington football team. They're the Washington Commanders, although I'm still calling them the Washington football team by accident a few times already. But this is a team that feels like there's a lot of what-ifs, right? It's if Carson Wentz plays well, if Antonio Gibson stays healthy, if the offense is able to execute what Scott Turner wants to do. This feels like an offense that is built more on the what-if than the actuality.
Yeah, well, I mean, the what-ifs are always going to follow Carson Wentz because now he's become a journeyman. He's now on his third team, and you're looking to say. I mean, he on paper he had a decent season last year. I believe 27-7, but of course you saw the good and the bad. The bad, you saw the way the season ended against the Jaguars. Now you have a vastly improved receiving core here to work with, and of course Terry McLaurin. You have Curtis Samuel, who's their slot guy, who's very good in space and explosive. And then you have Jahan Dotson, a player from who they selected in the first round from Penn State, who I got to see up close and personal at the pro day. He's pro ready, plug and play starter from day one, in my opinion. Very advanced route runner. So he has a good nucleus of receivers to work with. And then from a tight end standpoint, you look at Logan Thomas, and he's really, people forget. I think he's sort of overlooked and forgotten about a lot because he's not mentioned nearly enough with some of the top tight ends in football. But when you look at his production and track record, I think you'll see a tight end that I think he's going to form an instant connection with Wentz. And I think Wentz is going to have to lean on him, much like he has in the past with his tight end. So he does have a decent passing contingent of pass catchers to work with there. Now, offensive line, that's where the question lies, right? Because they have a lot of questions on that unit, in my opinion.
You mentioned the offensive line. What is... I don't even know what they can do, honestly, Andrew, because every time I keep looking at their roster, I feel like I've looked at it 4 times this week, and it feels like the offensive line is kind of duct tape at this point.
Yeah, it's bad. I mean, you have 2 guys that they had to grab from other teams, and veteran journeymen, Trey Turner and Andrew Norwell.
Right.
And those guys are just they're just guys. They're backups. They're adequate backups on most teams, and now they're really being asked to start for this team. But outside of Sam Cosmi, the right tackle, who was in the second-round pick in 2021, they don't really have a lot of guys that you could really hang your hat on. I mean, Charles Leno is there, but I mean, you're right. And when you mentioned the offensive line is essentially held together by duct tape, you're right. So I don't know that that's going to be enough to. I don't know that the offensive skill players that they have are going to be enough to overcome the porous offensive line that's going to be in front of the quarterback. So that's going to be the problem. And then Antonio Gibson, as far as health, I believe he led the NFL in carries last season, but he wasn't really able to be as productive as you'd like early in the season. The offensive line wasn't generating much push, so I don't know how different that's going to be based on what they have to work with.
Yeah, Gibson was 4th in carries last year. He had 9 more than Dalvin Cook, just to give everybody an idea of kind of what company he was in last year. Let's flip it over to the defense. Last year, the defense didn't play good, Andrew, for the first few weeks of the season. They finally found their footing halfway through into the later part of the season. Can Washington get off on a better foot to start this year defensively?
Yeah, I think they will, and that comes with cohesiveness. I mean, at the top of our conversation, we talked about how sometimes it takes a little while for pieces to gel, and it's not that chemistry isn't always built instantaneous. It takes time of working together, growing together, building that trust in one another, and I think now you started to see that in the second half of last season, the familiarity of playing with one another. So, I mean, again, on paper, that's a dominant defense, probably the most formidable defensive line in football, right? So can they really, it's great to have that, title in the off season, but you have to live up to it. And they have so much blue chip talent on that line. Now they need to be able to deliver. And I think they're ultimately going to, and I think that's really going to be their calling card this season. I think the defense is really going to have to win some games for them because I just don't know how they're going to manufacture any sort of consistency on offense with that offensive line in front of Carson Wentz.
We know how good the defensive line is in Washington. Arguably, if not the best, one of the best in the NFL, Andrew. But is the secondary good enough to hold up their end of the bargain?
I have my doubts about that. Outside of Cam Curl, who I really do like, he's a great story. 7th round pick in 2020. I think he's been really solid on the back end in the middle of that defense. But, you have Benjamin St. Juste, who I like coming out of Minnesota. He's 6'4", really rare size and length for a corner on the outside. But I don't know that, he's really essentially being asked to be the top corner, and I don't know that he's equipped to do that. So they're going to have some areas of weakness that I think teams are going to attack. You look at the other side of him, Kendall Fuller. He's been around, he's experienced, but I think you're going to see the corners get attacked a little bit and get exploited a little bit there if the defensive line isn't able to get home with regularity. So that could be a problem for them. I really like what they've done at linebacker. We didn't mention that, but Jamin Davis, first-round pick in 2021. I think he's going to be really come into his own this season, become a household name. Obviously he wasn't much of a household name even last season when he was drafted in the first round, but I think you're going to see him really burst onto the scene this year. I think he's going to be a key guy in that second level for Washington.
Let's head down to Dallas. Everybody hates Dallas, but we're going to talk about him anyway. My biggest gripe with Dallas, Andrew, is that I feel like for a team that let Amari Cooper basically leave for almost nothing and, didn't really do much to kind of, solidify a wide receiver core that basically only one guy is 100% healthy. That's CeeDee Lamb. Gallup's coming off of that injury.
Yeah, Gallup's coming off the injury, but you also have James Washington there, and Jalen Tolbert's a guy that I'm probably high on more than you, based on what you're conveying. It's a 3rd-round pick from South Alabama. I got a chance to see him grow and develop over the past few seasons, really coming into his own and emerging against some premier schools. And so I think that he might actually be able to contribute earlier than some may anticipate. As far as Gallup could be an X factor on that offense if he's able to be healthy, because he provides them with something that they don't currently already have, as far as being someone that can separate downfield. He can win at all 3 levels. Long arm guy, and I think that he can win in a multitude of ways. So if he's able to, if he's ready to go and can stay healthy, I think he helps unlock the full potential of that. But, of course, CeeDee Lamb is my breakout player for that offense. I think it's going to go through him, the whole passing game, that is. And he's really proven that he's ready for a larger role. And I think that you're going to see him really take the reins this season and step up as the primary target there. I'm really interested to see what James Washington can do for that offense, because I think maybe a change of scenery would have done him well, probably even earlier than this season. I think he really got caught in numbers crunch there in Pittsburgh, and he battled some health issues and things like that. But I do think that there's talent there, and I'm interested to see if they're able to get that out of him now that he'll have a more steady role in an offense.
Speaking of health issues, it seemed like almost everybody on the Cowboys offensive line was injured last year. What is your confidence in that offensive line to hold up this year?
Well, injuries are almost impossible to predict. You just I don't know if you're one to believe in lightning striking twice. But I think that when you see what they have there, if healthy, that's a dominant line, right? I think that could be a difference maker. They should be able to dominate in the trenches and give Dak Prescott enough time to facilitate the football to the weapons that we outlined. So, I'm not gonna. It's hard to predict injuries. I think that all things even right now as we speak here on July 21st. I think that's the best offensive line, or one of the best offensive lines in football.
On the defensive side, what do you think the Cowboys defense can be this year? They made some interesting additions back there.
Yeah, they certainly did. You look at Sam Williams at defensive end, who was a 2nd-round pick. Jabril Cox was a 4th-round pick in 2021, and I think he's going to have more of a role this season. Micah Parsons, of course, really took the NFL by storm and contributed early last season and became a dominant force. And they have at the center of their defensive line, you have Gallimore and Osa Odigizua, who was a player that sort of took on an elevated role last season out of nowhere, and I think that he really performed. And until proven otherwise, or until unseated, he'll be a starter on that team. So and then on the back end, you look at Trayvon Diggs, Trayvon Diggs is a polarizing type of player because he gets the interceptions, but there's plenty of times where his technique and things like that aren't necessarily up to par, and he can get beat on occasion. I think that you might see teams be a little bit more aggressive and taking advantage of him on that side and go after him a little bit more this season. Jordan Lewis is a nickel corner who I really like, very fluid player. When he's the type of guy that you're going to see him match up with running backs out of the backfield and things like that. He's done that in the past with guys like Alvin Kamara. J-Ron Curse is a very long safety. I believe he's 6'4", so they have some length back there. And I'm really going to be interested to see what Dan Quinn's able to do with this group of guys, and if they're able to play the standard.
And just to remind folks, South Jersey's own Bridgeton High School graduate Marquise Bell is trying to make the team this year. We'll see if he's going to be a Dallas Cowboy when they finally make that 53-man roster, or if he'll be on the practice squad. Andrew, let's wrap it up here with the NFC East here on Football at 4. How do the Eagles stack up against their rivals, and who do you think wins the division this year?
I think they stand up quite well against their rivals, and the guy that puts the sort of tips the scale in that favor is A.J. Brown. I think getting a bona fide number one receiver that's going to draw coverage away from Devontae Smith, open things up for Quez Watkins to be more of a vertical slot, give Jalen Hurts more of a big body red zone target, a bigger target to throw the football to, and you have Dallas Goedert there as well. I think you're going to see a more prolific aerial attack this season for Philadelphia, which, as you know, that's what Jeffrey Lurie really wants it to be. So I think you're going to see Jalen Hurts have a little bit more command of the offense, and he has the pieces to do it. And this is a make-or-break year for Jalen. So I think that when you see what they have from a firepower standpoint, it's as good as anyone in the NFL as far as just having the different types of guys that can win in a myriad of ways. So I like what they have. And then you look at the offensive line, which is really what it comes down to, and the offensive line is terrific. It's in terrific shape right now. You have Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Jason Kelsey, Isaac Seumalo, who will probably in all likelihood be the starter there at right guard. And then you have Lane Johnson. So you have the protection and you have the firepower to make things happen. And in order to win that division, you're going to have to be able to outgun guys like the Dallas Cowboys that do have plenty of firepower in their own right. So the pressure is going to be on Jalen Hurts a little bit, but I think he's going to be ready to answer the bell.
He's Andrew DiCecco. Follow him on Twitter at @DiCecco NFL. And, of course, by the time we speak to him again next week, the Eagles will be on the field at the NovaCare Center in training camp. Andrew, we're finally at the football season.
Yeah, man, we're there.
Talk to you next week, Andrew. Take care.
Sounds good. Bye.